big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
Ryan Poles has signed a contract extension. There's been some people who are a total fan of the move. Non-Bears fans are taking to Twitter saying it is one of the worst moves because he's statistically one of the worst GMs in NFL history, which I quite frankly find very hard to believe because since when did we start judging GMs like we judge quarterbacks by their win-loss record? Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. I'm Usayd Koshul. He's Steve Letizia. Check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at Usayd Koshul, at CFC Bears. Sorry, I was going to mention your other account there. Steve, I know we both had some busy weekends. The countdown to training camp is officially on. I mean, rookies report the 19th, vets report next week on the 22nd. So Bears football is almost here, but how's everything going first off?
Everything's going good. Like you said, Bears football is almost here. I feel like the offseason, especially after the draft, just kind of drags on. So I'm excited to actually watch the Bears practice at least, and then eventually get into games. So anytime football comes around, I'm doing good.
I mean, and I don't know how we both didn't coordinate this, by the way. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're both wearing red shirts today. So I have no idea how that happened, but maybe it's because we need to start talking about this Ryan Poles extension first. So first off, the terms of the deal, I think, tie him to Chicago through 2029, right? It's like another 4 to 5 year deal. So he had basically 2 years remaining on his current deal, 25 and 26, meaning he signed basically another 3-year extension through 27, 28, and 29, which I think is smart because if we look at the entire timeline of this thing, I mean, the Bears went into this offseason, right, 2025, knowing that Ryan Poles was going to be the GM. Ben Johnson, who obviously I think is the biggest domino this offseason, wanted alignment with the GM. And there's a ton of talk about, hey, if Ben Johnson maybe doesn't like the GM he's working with, does he not take the gig? Does he go ahead and does he try to sort of find a GM? Does a team hire him and say you're allowed to go ahead and pick your own GM? So it's a whole bunch of, I think, really different questions here that have to go ahead and make sense. But overall, the biggest plus of this extension is the fact that Caleb Williams, assuming that he is the Bears quarterback of the future, okay? The Bears are going to pick up his 5th-year option, which runs through 2029, his rookie contract. Ben Johnson also here through 2029. Ryan Poles now here through 2029. So for the first time in, I guess, modern NFL history, the Bears finally have a general manager, a quarterback, and a head coach that is aligned, although there's certain alignment issues because it's not like Ben Johnson was here when they drafted Caleb Williams, but that's a whole other side conversation.
Yeah, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle on this. I know exactly why they did it. I mean, you mentioned Ben Johnson. That I'm sure when they were talking to Ben Johnson and looking to hire him, he wanted some sort of alignment, with the GM in order for him to take the job. So I think that's really, what happened here. That's why this deal was made now. To me, just in a vacuum, not taking Ben Johnson out of the equation, I don't think Ryan Poles has earned a 5-year contract extension yet. I think he's done some good things, and I like the direction the Bears are heading. I just want to see some actual results before I extend my GM. He had 2 years left on his contract. I would have preferred to wait until after this year just to make sure that, everything that he did is the right move. We were really excited for everything last year. All Bears fans were, and it blew up in our face. I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but in order to give a 5-year extension to our GM, I would like just to see the results before giving him that contract. But like you said, it really comes down to Ben Johnson. That's what they wanted. So I understand completely why they did it. I don't hate it whatsoever because I think I think we're heading in the right direction. I just wanted to see tangible results before extending him.
Well, to me, one of the most underrated parts of this whole thing is the fact that it's like you align the GM, the head coach, and the quarterback, okay? And then on top of that, for the GM, the guy who had basically the shortest contract of the 3, you were willing to go ahead and give him that multi-year deal to make sure that Ryan Poles is here through the end of the 2029 season, which to me I think is really interesting because the greater talking point here I think is that the Bears are no longer the way that ownership and Kevin Warren is thinking is that it is no longer, hey, so we hope that we can do it with these guys. It is we believe we can do it with these guys, which there's a big difference between hoping and believing. Hoping would have been we think the Bears have figured it out to now the Bears finally feel like they figured it out, which again, I think it's two very different and contrasting philosophies because this team is finally sort of saying, all right, well, we needed a quarterback forever. We feel like we finally have a quarterback. We have needed a general manager that's going to come in and follow modern NFL trends, which for the most part, Ryan Poles has done because he's drafted an offensive lineman every single year at this point. He's drafted a cornerback every single year at this point, too. And I believe it's like 3 out of the 4 NFL drafts is where he's taking a wide receiver. So he's got that part nailed down. So again, finally becoming sort of a more modern franchise, but then also not overspending in free agency. I think so many people forget that the old Bears would have ponied up the bank struck for Dio Odiengbo and Grady Jarrett in free agency, but it wouldn't have been like a 3-year, $48 million deal. It would have been 3 years, $75 million is what it would have been, right? For a guy like Odiengbo, paying him near the top of the league in terms of pass rush money. Like once you start to push into that $24 million range, that becomes Trey Hendrickson, Montez Sweat type range. And Dio's not there yet. So smarter job by Ryan Poles. But then you also look at the head coach here, and it's like the Bears feel like they finally have their head coach as well. And the reason being is because everything that Ben Johnson said and done this offseason has been constantly different compared to what we've been used to hearing in the past. Now, to me, the big question obviously is still going to be this, though, is that do these results translate to the field in terms of are the 2025 Bears going to be like 2018 Bears, a 1-year fluke, and then team's going to fall off? Or is it going to be the type of team that gradually and consistently is able to have that sort of sustained success? And what better person to have sustained success than the head coach who came from a program where and a team where they were 1-8 at one point and finished 9-8, and then eventually sort of built up to being the number 1 seed in the NFC. And then obviously, you have a quarterback who I like to consider as a bit of an underdog. And the reason being is because when Caleb, I know you're more in tune to college football than I am because of your draft stuff, but I think when Caleb was at Oklahoma, there was all this hype around him to kind of be that next big NFL quarterback, right? Like people are saying Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, probably about as damn good as it gets for some of these quarterbacks. But then what had happened is, Caleb went to USC, and that 22 season at USC was probably one of the best college football seasons we've seen out of a quarterback. But then 23, is when they fell off. The Trojans and Lincoln Riley sort of fell off. And there's a ton of criticism around Caleb, which I feel like still translated into last year. But credit to Ryan Poles for sticking to his gut and saying, no, this is going to be our guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done a lot of good stuff, and I think the Bears are heading in the right direction. I think Ben Johnson, was the best head coach available, and Ryan Poles went out and got him. So credit there. I think some of his free agency stuff has been hit or miss. I think he did good this year, but then we also have big contracts to DeAndre Swift and big contracts to Tremaine Edmonds. So there were times where he's given out big contracts, and it hasn't really worked out yet. I don't want to get too much into like the negatives because I do like this. I think it's the right decision overall to do it. It's more for me a timing thing. And with Caleb Williams, it really, how we evaluate Ben Johnson and how we evaluate Ryan Poles is really going to come down to Caleb Williams. Because if Caleb Williams is the guy that we think he is, that I think he can be, that's going to hide a lot of warts everywhere else on the roster. It makes the roster building so much easier if you have not only an elite quarterback, which I think it can be, but an elite quarterback on a rookie contract. That makes your team building so much easier. So whatever happens with this move and with the Bears going forward, it just all comes back to Caleb Williams. And if Caleb Williams is that guy, then you can miss on a couple free agents. You can miss maybe even on a couple trades. It won't matter because you're always going to be in contention because you have the quarterback. And I think Ben Johnson's the real deal. If for whatever reason this doesn't go as planned, I don't think it's Ben Johnson's fault. So they have the head coach in place. I'm pretty sure they have the quarterback in place. But we just need to see a little bit more. But like I said, if Caleb Williams does what Caleb Williams is capable of doing with Ben Johnson, then the Bears are heading in the right direction, and Ryan Poles is going to look like a genius. If every other move that Ryan Poles makes works out, but Caleb Williams doesn't, Ryan Poles is going to look like an idiot. That's just the way that team building works. If you don't have a quarterback, it doesn't really matter.
Just saying, our last episode, we went ahead and discussed whether or not the pressure was on Ryan Poles. So that was a little bit of us saying we may or may not know that a possible extension was coming. Okay, but see, the other thing is this, is that if you take the quarterback out of the equation when it comes to Ryan Poles, and again, the greater sort of conversation that has to be had here is that there's two separate points to acknowledge. You can hate the Ryan Poles extension, but then evaluate him in an objective manner, right? I don't think that it's, well, evaluate Ryan Poles with the body of work that he's put in over the last 4 years from 22 to 25. And then if you hate that, you have to hate the extension as well. I think that in a sense, given the current state of the roster, you can love the contract extension or hate the contract extension, but also evaluate him based on the roster. See, the roster to me, as you mentioned, I mean, he's had his hits, he's had his misses. Now, obviously, if you start going position group by position group and you classify it as hit or miss or mediocre, okay, so hit would be the wide receiver position, a hit would be the cornerback position, right? Those are the two positions where the Bears are absolutely loaded with talent, all thanks to Ryan Poles, because every single corner and every single receiver on the roster was acquired by him except for Jalen Johnson. All right, Jalen Johnson is the only one that was left over from the Matt Nagy era, which I don't know how Jalen Johnson and Cole Kmet do it, having to deal with 3 head coaches in 6 years at this point and 2 different GMs. I mean, huge shout out to those guys. But then you start looking at certain positions, such as the offensive line, for example, and you're like, all right, well, if we're evaluating Ryan Poles based on what the Bears have going into 2025, so the scenarios get a little bit sort of bleak here. And I like to say they get bleak here because 60 to 80% of your offensive line is going to be new. It'll be 60% if Braxton Jones beats out Ozzie Trapilo, which I don't think is going to happen. It'll be 80% of the offensive line is going to be new if Ozzie Trapilo wins a job, because the only sort of good player the only sort of proven player in a Bears jersey right now, as good as Joe Thuney is, as good as Drew Dahlman is, Jonah Jackson, I think, is a toss-up. But Darnell Wright's kind of the only proven commodity and consistent commodity that this team has had, right? And I'm not factoring in Joe Thuney or Drew Dahlman just yet because they haven't played an actual snap in a Bears uniform at this point. Then you start looking at positions like tight end, you're like, all right, well, you paid DeAndre Swift $8 million a year, but he really only paid him that based on one average year of production, let's call it, in Minnesota. The safety room obviously has never really been able to stay healthy, and then the linebacker room, I think, TJ Edwards has been probably the most underrated signing of Ryan Poles' tenure, because 3 years, $19.5 million was the original deal, and he just got a 2-year extension. But the bigger issue there, I think, is also that Tremaine Edmonds was a downgrade from what Roquan Smith was. Which at that point, let's just call it how it is. You weren't basing it off the talent. You were basing it off what the head coach at the time wanted.
Yeah, every GM's going to have misses. It's unfair to only talk about his misses, and just say, oh, he traded for Chase Claypool like he's a bad GM. Like, that wasn't undoubtedly a bad move, but that was not, that's not, what he's defined by. So I think overall he has done a good job with the roster. Like you said, wide receiver, cornerback, he he inherited Jalen Johnson, but he did extend him, so credit there. He didn't let him walk or trade him anything like that. So I think those two positions are you're right. I would say he's done a really good job there. Linebacker, running back, probably not the best. What offensive line, kind of like you said, a toss up right now. We think it's heading in the right direction, but we got to see it. Defensive line, too, is kind of, for me at least, my opinion, is in that same boat. But one of the I want to you mentioned earlier, we shouldn't evaluate GMs on records, and I 100% agree. But the guy does not have a good record, as a GM. But and to his credit, there, he did do kind of a full teardown when he came in. Like that first year, the record, throw the record book out the window, because that team was bad by design. But this is also a GM that has, I looked it up after this, he's traded 7 picks for veterans over the last 2 years or 3 years, I think. That's a guy who's trying to win now. So I think when we're evaluating him, the last 2 years, the Bears were trying to win and trading draft picks, some premium draft picks, 2 second-round picks for veterans in order to win games, and they just have not. So, in my opinion, he's done a lot of really good things, and just for the record, I think this, is going to work out for the Bears. But I think there's a lot more negatives in his report card, or whatever you want to call it, than maybe what we're talking about. I think to be honest, he's kind of just like an average GM, but you tie him with Ben Johnson, you tie him with Caleb Williams, and I think that's just the right move. You're obviously not going to, he hasn't done enough bad things to fire him, not even close. So you kind of have to extend him, is kind of where I'm at with this.
Well, I'm glad you brought the trades up, because, see, there's a certain, so you have to evaluate the whole picture, I feel like. And there's a certain sort of context that we have to look at when it comes to what Ryan Poles is ultimately doing. And what he's ultimately done. The toughest part about Ryan Poles is that he gets put on this pedestal. And again, I get him probably being a little bit too critical here, but the guy gets put on a pedestal because of the trade back for the 2023 number 1 overall pick. But that shouldn't necessarily, to me, overlook the fact that he traded a second-round pick for Montez Sweat. Now, whether you love or hate Montez Sweat, again, I understand he played for a lame duck coaching staff over the last basically year and a half, but the results from the second round pick to give up for Montez Sweat, the Bears haven't gotten the ROI on that, like a lot of people hoped. They haven't gotten the return on investment on the $98 million deal that he signed either. All right. I mean, they also have not, in my opinion, gone ahead and fully gotten past the trade for Chase Claypool, because let's call it how it is. I mean, in 2023, it seemed like a good move, but Chase Claypool had a strong rookie season. But after that, he kind of just fell off going into year 2, year 3, year 4. So the Steelers were probably laughing at him all the way to the bank for giving up that second round pick. So this is a guy that, every single time, to your point, that we've seen him try to stack picks in the second round, and he's been pretty solid at it for the most part. He's turned around and traded those picks for some of these veterans that, maybe were not necessarily the best culture or scheme fits on other teams, is what it really was. So it becomes this incredibly, I think, complicated dynamic of like, do I look at Ryan Poles parts in 22 and 23 and 24, and I'm like, what were you doing? Yeah, there's decisions that I question. Okay, I didn't even get into the Nate Davis fiasco, which was a whole other thing itself. Which, I mean, I haven't seen the name Nate Davis and Ryan Poles mentioned in the same sentence since the Bears released him. Okay, but then you also look at everything else, and you're like, it was good for him to come in and to initiate a full-scale teardown and a total rebuild, because the way that he saw it was that he wasn't going to go anywhere with a roster that had Khalil Mack and Danny Trevathan and Akeem Hicks. Okay, but now what's sort of happened is he has his own guys there. But to me, in a sense, for some of the capital the Bears have had in terms of the draft, plus the additions that have been made, it's been slightly underwhelming, which is why I think this roster still has a lot of questions, because it goes back to Ryan Poles. There's instances where you're like, well, maybe this team didn't need to take another cornerback in the 6th round, or the 4th round, and they could have very easily used that to plug up another depth piece on offense, which I get they love to have the board talk to them. But then again, sometimes it does seem like he's overdrafting just because the board lets him overdraft a certain position.
Yeah, I think that's the great way to put it. I mean, there's without a doubt the roster is in a better position now than it was when he took over. I don't think anyone could conceivably argue the other way there. But I do think it is fair to wonder if the roster is as good as it could have been given the assets that we had. Like you said, the trading the 2nd round pick for Montez Sweat have not. I mean, Montez, he's been fine. Especially, I mean, initially he was great down the stretch, 2 years ago. Last year was not maybe as good, and plus you gave him a very good contract. Trading the 2nd for Chase Claypool, you mentioned the Nate Davis signing, Tremaine Edmonds signing, a couple other signings. Not to harp too much on him, but I think it's fair to wonder if this team could be in a better position if he used his resources a little bit better. But overall, the Bears did what they needed to do. They needed to align the GM and the head coach and the quarterback for the first time ever, like you said earlier. So they did what they needed to do, but to me, I wish they would have just waited 6 months. I don't know if that was a possibility because I don't know what they promised, Ben Johnson to get him here. But to me, that's just kind of what I want to see results on the field before I really get excited about a GM.
Just saying, to me, this is semi-alignment, and I get that I am more critical than most of the other Bears reporters and, analysts out there. This, to me, is semi-alignment because, to me, true GM, head coach, quarterback alignment is the head coach and GM are in the war room at the same time that the pick was being made. Here, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, so again, as much as we think this franchise is changing, which they are, there's certain old school practices that, again, probably never going to get away with. We talked about Montez Sweat earlier, enough about Ryan Poles. I mean, let's get into this defensive line, dude, because this is a group that the Bears threw a lot of money and draft capital at this group over the last couple of years. I mean, you go to 23 and you spend basically 2 second-round picks on Gervon Dexter, but then also on Montez Sweat. And then you go ahead and you sign Grady Jarrett to a big deal. 3-year, $48 million deal, I think it was. Then you sign Dayo Odeyingbo to another 3-year, $48 million deal. Then you spend another 2nd-round pick on a Shamar Turner. So Andrew Billings got a big contract as well. The Bears have invested big time in the D-line throughout Ryan Poles' tenure. Now I guess the question is going into 2025, what is the state of this D-line? What's the ceiling for this group? How good do they have to be in order for this defense to take the step forward? Because to me, this is going to be the group that unlocks the rest of Dennis Allen's defense. Dennis Allen, a guy that's notorious for his famous 4-man fronts, rushing 4 guys, kind of taking a lot of pressure off the linebacker as well as the secondary. All right, so to me, like if you're the Bears D-line right now, you better hope that this thing is the best positional group, or if not a top 3 positional group, considering all the resources that you've poured into this thing. And when I say top 3, I mean top 3 across the whole roster.
Yeah, I think this is a position group that might have the most variance on the Bears roster, like in terms of high end versus low end. I think we'll start with the high end. I think it does have a possibility to be a strength of this team, but there's a lot of question marks to get there. But I like we've talked about Montez Sweat a little bit. I think he's extremely talented. I think he's going to do really well in Dennis Allen's defense as well. He's a guy who's really good against the run, which Dennis Allen likes. He's a guy who can play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage and still generate pressure. Whereas, you have some pass rushers who have to, line up, in a wide 9 alignment to get pressure. He can get pressure from a more inside alignment. So I think he's going to do really well in Dennis Allen's defense. Is he going to be a top 5 pass rusher in the NFL? Probably not. But I think he can do really well in this defense and be a really solid player for you. Gervon Dexter has shown so many flashes over the years. He hasn't really put it all together yet, but the flashes are there. And if he kind of builds off that, I think he has a chance to take a step forward. Grady Jarrett is a question mark, but if Grady Jarrett can be more of a rotational pass rusher rather than, kind of the go-to guy that he was in Atlanta, I think he still has enough left in the tank. But at the same time, the Falcons cut him for a reason. So, and they have been in the, in the practicing with him. They've been in the room with him. They obviously don't think he really has anything left. Brian Poles obviously disagrees. So if he can provide some pass rush juice here on third downs, play a little bit on early downs as well, I think there's some upside there. Like Shamar Turner's kind of all upside at this point. Andrew Billings is, you know what you're getting with Andrew Billings. He's just a solid player. To Brian Poles' credit, that was probably one of his better signings, in Andrew Billings. And then you got Austin Booker, who's kind of a question mark too, but has a ton of talent, a ton of athleticism, and could turn into a good pass rusher. So there's a lot there to work with, and there's a lot that could really go right, but there's also a lot that can really go wrong there. Maybe Javon Dexter doesn't take the next step. Maybe Grady Jarrett is washed up. Maybe Austin Booker isn't as good as we think he is. I'd even mentioned Dio at Yingbo, but maybe doesn't really take that next step that they were kind of expecting him to do. So it could be it could be one of the better units for the Bears. It also could be a weak link for the Bears. There's a lot of variance in between there. If you had to ask me right now, I really don't know exactly where they're going to fall.
I mean, you mentioned Austin Booker, and again, I'll be honest with you, I sort of forgot about Austin Booker because this year for training camp previews on the website, I didn't do any of the defensive positions at all. But see, Austin Booker to me is perhaps the most interesting case study here because you're getting a guy that's 6'5", 6'6". The length is certainly there. He's right around the same measurables in terms of height and weight as Adayo Odiengbo, by the way. And I think it's interesting because if we prefer to go back over the last basically 2 to 3 years and look at Adayo Odiengbo and then look at Austin Booker's college tape, I'm sure that some people would probably come to the conclusion and say Dio and Austin Booker are the exact same players. It's just the difference is honestly the name and how long they've been in the league. But with Austin Booker, you kind of, as we talk about the defensive line room as a whole, you kind of need him to be that guy this year, right? Because the third guy in the pass rush rotation amongst the edge rushers, because Dominique Robinson is not making this final roster. Let's just call it how it is. Irrespective of what, someone asked a couple weeks ago, hey, what do you think of Dominique Robinson? And one of the coaches was like, yeah, he's been here. He's been good. It was your typical offseason chatter. But Austin Booker has to sort of be that guy this year because beyond that, the Bears don't really have a ton. The questions regarding whether or not Javon Dexter is going to play edge rusher, because, again, people looked at one picture of Javon Dexter showing up to Halas Hall and then automatically said, well, he's slimmed down now, even though, one picture doesn't tell the whole story, and the Bears are going to release a official roster with updated height and weight counts closer to training camp. So Javon Dexter, I think, has a better chance of succeeding inside than he probably does as an edge rusher. And the reason being is because, again, when he was in college, he was kind of playing in this hybrid 3-man, but also 4-man front at times, right? It really just depended. So Florida was willing to move him around a lot. Unfortunately, for the Bears here and Javon Dexter is that because there's been so much turmoil along that D-line over the last couple of years, he's never really had the chance to kind of sit and properly develop. Yeah, he's been 1 tech at times. He's had to play 3 tech. I just don't think it makes sense to move him outside to 4 tech because it's like, why would you move him outside to 4 tech? I understand you could do it to take the pressure off of a Montez Sweat or a Adayo Odiengbo. But then the other big part of it is that it's like if you move Javon Dexter to a 4, a 5, a 7, or a 9 tech, what happens is then you're putting a Shamar Turner and a Grady Jarrett in the middle. Now, the issue is that teams might pick up on the fact that Grady Jarrett is much older as a player. And so there's a legit chance that they just decide, hey, we're going to go ahead, we're going to run right at him. So overall, this is a D-line room, I think, that, has improved, but you need Austin Booker to take a step forward, and then you need Dio Odiengbo to live up to the contract. But then you also, I think, to me, need Javon Dexter to be the guy that, takes the biggest step forward while Montez Sweat just becomes consistent at best.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Javon Dexter. Keep him on the interior. I think that's where his upside is. The guy's 320 pounds or whatever he is. That's tough to play on the edge that way. I think if there is a defensive tackle that they want to move around, to me, it'd be Shamar Turner. I watched him a lot at Texas A&M, and he actually played on the edge 2 years ago. And then he moved inside this past year because they brought in Nick Scourton from Purdue, so they push him inside, and that's, the Bears drafted him to play D tackle. They've said they're not playing him at edge, but I think if there was one to play out there, it'd be Turner maybe potentially. But I agree, Austin Booker, whatever he does is really going to just elevate this team. If he is nothing, then the Bears really don't have anyone coming off the bench to rush a passer, and they're just rushing the same four and over and over and over again. If he could just give you something, at least as a situational pass rusher, it completely changes everything, because you can give Montez Sweat a break. You can kick Dio inside on passing downs potentially, and then put Austin Booker coming off the edge, and that will give you, with Javon Dexter or Grady Jarrett, whoever you want, that gives you 4 legit pass rushers on the field at one time. So there's a lot kind of right. It's tough to put this on, a 5th round rookie or a 2nd-year player, but him kind of coming out and solidifying himself as a real NFL player would do tremendous things for this defense.
Well, I think the other big thing with Austin Booker is that under the last coaching staff, it really seemed like if you were a day 3 rookie, and Braxton Jones was the exception, you didn't really see a ton of playing time. It's almost like, I don't know if you remember, but you remember how Tom Thibodeau was so reluctant to play rookies, even though they had a ton of talent, cough, Jimmy Butler. That's what Matt Eberflus was basically like, where it's like, yeah, you're a rookie, but we're not really going to play you. Because, like, I look at guys like Tyler Scott, for example, not to go too far down this sort of rabbit hole here. And, like, Tyler Scott, his rookie year showed a lot of promise and potential, but last year they didn't get him as many reps as they probably should have, and Tyler was always, when I'd speak to him in the locker room after games, always in really good spirits, and he's like, hey, well, the positive is I'm not starting a lot of games, but when I am starting, I'm starting with things that, most people couldn't do. Like, how many people can say, well, I've started a game on Monday Night Football? How many people can say I've gone ahead and I get to play in an NFL game? So it is really one of those things where, I'm in agreement with you. So I would take Shamar Turner and experiment with him on the edge more. And I don't think he's a carbon copy of DeMarcus Walker, by the way. I think that, that's in a sense a lazy-ish comparison, because to me, Turner's just a far better athlete than DeMarcus Walker ever was, right? But the big thing I think really is that you take Turner, move him outside to the edge, move him inside as well if need be, in order to go ahead and to allow some of these guys like Javon Dexter to finally have the consistency that, like, quite frankly, they've never had. Plus, just from a team building perspective, it makes more sense that you're taking the veteran, sticking him at one position, and then experimenting with the rookie, because the rookie has time to sort of figure it out, right? Javon Dexter's already going into year 3, so like he's basically playing for a second contract in Chicago at this point.
I agree. And then I just another guy that they have that I think he's an undrafted free agent, but I think Xavier Carlton has a chance to maybe get into a rotation as well. I think I'd rather have him on the roster than Dominic Robinson, but yeah. Austin Booker and Shamar Turner. Shamar Turner, the way I look at him this year is kind of he's such a, I don't want to say raw project, but he is maybe, I don't know if he's exactly like ready to step in right away into a big role. But whatever you get from Shamar Turner this year is just kind of like icing on the cake. You put him in advantageous situations, see what he can do. If he gets a couple sacks, great. Get him some learning experience. But yeah, he's a guy who, I do think he has still some more developing to do before he can make an impact. So if he does come in right away and can be a situational pass rusher, whether that's from the interior or from the outside, and get you a few sacks or a few pressures, I think that's a good rookie year for a late 2nd round pick. The other thing with Turner is and other Trapillo too, and oh man, I'm blanking on his name. Luther Burden is all 3 of those guys are still unsigned. So that's something we kind of need to look at going into training camp here. All of the 2nd round picks in the NFL are kind of not signed right now, except for 2, I believe. So we're getting into a situation where we might be on holdout lookout until that's so. If Turner does have to doesn't play in training camp or practice right away because he's got a contract situation, that's just going to make it a little even harder for him. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind with this defensive line rotation.
Just saying, last point I will make here before we wrap this thing up. I'm not at all concerned about these guys not having their rookie contract signed. It's going to be interesting. Anyways, thanks for joining us this week, people. A little bit of an update looking ahead. So the next time that you guys hear from us is probably going to be when the Bears have reported to training camp. And the reason being, is because I'm out of town the rest of the week, so we're only going to be doing one episode this week. I'm sure Zach Pearson and Steven Johnson will have something on the Bear Report podcast for you guys. All right, I know we're not doing picks for polls this week either, but make sure you are liking, commenting, and subscribing to the YouTube channel, as well as giving the podcast, whatever platform you listen to it on, a 5-star rating and review. Make sure that you guys follow us on Twitter at HalasBeat, at CFC Bears, and at Usayd Koshul. If there's anything you guys want us to go ahead and discuss, shoot me a DM on Twitter, get onto the Bear Report website, and go ahead, leave a comment on the form as well. All right, maybe even leave a comment in the video, and then we'll look at all that. All right, go ahead and discuss it. We just hit 1,800 subscribers, so thank you guys for all your support. Really exciting stuff here as the 2025 season's right around the corner. Bear down, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you guys next time.